So we're now moving on to practice partner, where we recognize if you are going into private practice or in private practice that there's so much to consider, and maybe elements of that are not covered in core training. So as two peers, we get together and we just discuss parts of that journey. And today we're discussing business planning. And quite honestly, Rory, I think business planning is sometimes misunderstood. If you go online, certainly, and look up business planning, you're going to be bombarded with really complex documentation and formulas of business planning. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Rory.
Yes, I mean, I think just the term business
Yeah.
kind of emotes this idea of pinstripe suits and cigars for me. And what we're talking about is how to run your operation and what that's going to be, and all the things you've got to take on board. You know, when you start your own business, your own venture, there's certain commitments you've got to adhere to. You're paying tax, insurances, finding premises, working out how much you're going to charge per client. You know, where you're going to find your clients. All these come under the broad heading of business plan, don't they, Ken?
They do indeed. And I guess one of the first questions I think to look at in business planning, and this is kind of a more simplified template, I guess, that you might find online. But it's a good idea to write these ideas down. And the first question is, why private practice? So if you're looking at going into private practice, what are your motivations and what does that look like for you? So it may be you want to go into private practice because you want that to be your sole career, that you're going to completely submerge yourself in it and you want to gain all of your income from that. But it may also be that you want that to be partial income to supplement other interests and other activities that you do. And I think that's a great starting point is kind of laying out, what's this going to look like? What do I actually need it to do for me? And formalizing that in writing it down for yourself. And potentially, if you're going to be needing any loans, putting something into the bank, they're going to be asking for a business plan to kind of satisfy them as well, to give a idea of what your motivation or your reasonings are for going into private practice. And then once you've made that decision, then I guess you start thinking about things like, where will you practice? What's that going to look like? Are you going to potentially practice from home? And if you are, what might you need to do within your home to facilitate that? Are you perhaps going to practice online, which is, I guess, becoming more and more popular now as the technology improves? And in Counselling Tutor, we have training, a certificate in online and telephone counselling training, and thousands of therapists have taken that to be able to serve clients remotely. Of course, maybe you're considering working by visiting clients in their own home. Well, what might that look like, and what are the considerations that one might go through for that? So that definition of, okay, I'm going to go into private practice, but how is that? And it may be blended. It may be I'm going to work from my home and I'm also going to offer online working. And then I guess the question comes up, if you are going to be working from your own home or from a rented premises, which is of course another alternative there, what are the costs of that going to be? What are the costs of setup of that going to be? And what is it that you need? So you need to consider, let's say you're working from your own home or setting up in a business, the comfortable chairs, telephone, maybe a mobile, landline, maybe both, internet connection. What is the email address that you're going to have, that you're going to use for correspondence? Maybe a lockable filing cabinet. If you're going to be keeping documentation on the premises, you might need a printer to print things out. You might need a clock, tissues, fresh drinking water. Maybe if you're going to be taking payments right there in the room, would you maybe have a card reader? Because I guess cash is becoming less and less
popular.
Popular is a good word.
Yeah. Popular is a good word. Yeah.
It is a good. And I think it's important to remember that anything that you purchase for your service delivery, anything at all that you kind of outlay and buy for that, is tax deductible. You can offset that as the startup costs or the setup costs of starting your business. But it is a consideration, Rory, and you went through this very consideration yourself when you were setting up in private practice.
Yeah, I did. And I spent a lot of time in working for agencies, worked for school. Most of it, I have to say, unpaid, because I had a paid job as a tutor for a vast majority of that time. And when I came to set up in private practice, there was a few things that I had to think about. The first was finding a room. Did I do it in my own home, or did I do it did I practice in a set of rooms? And I balanced the two. The advantage of working from home is you didn't have to pay rent for the space, because my home's my home. But the disadvantage, of course, was that where I live, it's overseen and people could see people coming and going, and I didn't think that would be fair on clients. So I decided to opt for a room, and then of course you have to pay for that room and book the room, and you have to go out and find it. And as part of that, I mean, it's not perhaps business, but I made sure the room was accessible to wheelchair users, and had a car park, and had disabled toilets or accessible toilets. And then there was, how do you take the payment? And of course, in the middle of all that is, I'm going to be taking money as a self-employed person off people, which is fine, exchanging my skill and knowledge for money. But eventually, I'm going to have to pay tax. I'm going to have to set my tax up.
Yes.
Because the tax person will be wanting their cut. So there's a lot of things, and I basically, Ken, I think, started with a list. I added to it, and it got mightily long, I seem to remember. I know I never thought of that. I'll put that on the list. And nowadays, of course, it's kind of built in. It's a standard kind of way of working. But there were lots and lots of things that we needed to consider. And one of them, of course, maybe even advertising. Who do you advertise with? How do you get your message out there? Website, social media, all these things form a business. People have to know who you are before they can come to you. Do I go on a directory? Do I go, which route do I go there?
It is. And this is all part of the business planning stage rather than the business finding out stage by just going and kind of letting the doors open as you go. If you sit down beforehand, these can be considered, and you can offset risk by considering them. And it's the small things that we consider. So you might go and look at a room hire. You might say, okay, my business model is I'm going to hire a room locally, and the room costs X amount, and my counseling hour is going to be 50 minutes, and I will arrive 5 minutes before and I will leave 5 minutes after. So there you go. And I'm going to charge this much for it to be able to cover the room. But have you taken into consideration your travel time and your travel costs to and from that room? So a 50-minute counseling session may well take up 2 hours of your time in traveling there, traveling back, and putting the fuel costs on that. And if you consider all of those little details and pop them on your business plan and put an estimated cost next to that, it gives you an idea. And the idea, once you've got a business plan, it can kind of indicate how much you should be charging, because you need to cover the costs of running that business. And then you touched on something, and I think we'll make this the last part of today's section on this. We will continue business planning next week, where we're going to speak a lot more about it, because it's pretty in depth. So far we've looked at your motivations. Why are you looking to go into this? We've looked at what your model of delivery might look like. And you mentioned something, Rory. You said the paying of tax, and that links into how are you going to set up your company. So in the United Kingdom, so we can only speak about the United Kingdom, and you'd have to look to your own legislation regarding the setting up of companies in your own country to get an idea of what is available to you. But they pretty similar throughout the world. They just use different names, and there are different tax rates. But there are two main options in the UK at the moment. And the first one is what is called sole trader. Now, sole trader, you can just start pretty much straight away. It's always a good idea to get hold of an accountant and just say, you know what, I'm a sole trader. You can go to any bank in the United Kingdom and say, I want to start a counselling practice and I want to start as a sole trader. And they'll pretty much give you an account that you can open in the name that you want to trade without too many questions. And the reason that there's not too many questions with that is because of the legal status of a sole trader means it's you. It's you. You are liable. If there's any costs, you are liable for those costs. Any taxation that comes in, you are liable for that taxation at the tax rate. And you'd need to look at what the tax rate is because it fluctuates and changes depending on what your earning is. There's different levels. And if you take on any debt, you are 100% liable for that debt as an individual. And what I mean by that is if you were to default on that debt, they would be claiming that from you. And in worst case scenarios, and of course we're not looking at going to this level as a sole trader in counselling, but in worst case scenarios, there can be repossession of goods to offset costs of the debts that you hold because you become 100% liable for them. The reason that banks open the accounts without too many questions is they are that the risk is relatively low as long as you have a good credit record, you yourself as an individual. Yeah. They may give you an overdraft and they may even offer you a loan, but it's you that is taking that on. It's your own individual debt. And then the other alternative is to set up a limited company. If you're setting up a limited company, then the company is in itself it is seen in the eyes of the law as a individual in itself. So you are no longer the individual. So limited is limited by liability. That's what it basically means. So limited by liability, when you start off a limited company, there is a lot more process. The company is logged at something that is called Companies House, where the name of the company is registered and the company gets a registration number. Both of these do not apply to sole trader. And any debts that the business takes on belong to the business. Now, you may be a director, you may be a 100% shareholding director, it may just be you within that business, but there is an element of protection where the business is liable to the debts. There are laws that are applicable to running a limited company of how you run the laws, how you can take the money out. The thing is, if you do counseling in a limited company and you get paid for that counseling, that's not your money. Does not belong to you. It belongs to the company, the limited company. It is seen as a separate entity in the eyes of the law. You can take a salary from that company. You can take what is called dividends from the company. And dividends are basically, once the company has paid its expenses, what is left over would be your profit. And you can take part of that or you can take all of it. It's called dividends, taking it out that way, or you can pay yourself salary. There are more legalities. If you're setting up a limited company, you have to have audited books that are tracked, and those need to be submitted on an annual basis, and they need to be recorded and recorded at Companies House. If there's any changes in the business, let's say me and you, Rory, I start a limited company and I call it Happy Day Counselling, and then I say, Rory, it's going great, I've got too many clients, why don't you come and join me in this business? And you come and you join. We would need to go through a process of documenting that. We would need to submit that to Companies House. And to be able to make that happen. So you don't have the freedom in a limited company, but you do have the protection in a limited company. And there's certain tax breaks that one might get if you are running a limited company. And if you're listening to this and going, wow, this is so confusing, it is really worth, when setting up a business, recognizing that a business is where you're going to spend a big portion of your life, and it's going to hopefully give you some income. It is really well worth speaking to an accountant and being advised on what is the right route for you. If you start off as a sole trader, You can at a later stage switch over to a limited
Mm.
company. To start off as a limited company, it's not so easy. You can't just go from a limited company and go, oh, I'm going to be a sole trader now. You would have to close down that limited company, which in itself is expense and paperwork. But there's just some considerations, Rory.
Yes, and if you're listening to this thinking, oh gosh, that sounds so much, don't worry. Why don't you go to our Facebook page? Just type in Counselling Tutor into Facebook. Knock on the door. You'll find our Facebook page. Knock on the door, and you'll find thousands and thousands of like-minded people. Some of which are practicing counsellors who have companies, who run their own private practices, have been doing it for a long time. Knock on the door. We'll let you in. Come in, ask the questions, and you're going to get a whole heap of advice. I mean, we obviously say, check with an accountant, but there's lots of people within that group who are successfully running their own private practices, and they may be able to give you some guidance and some direction. And there's lots of useful, practical guidance and observations that come into that Facebook group. So Counselling Tutor into Facebook, closed group, knock on the door, and in you come and ask those questions. And I think, people graduate and they may want to be their own person. They may want to run their own business, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that there is clients are happy to pay for private therapy. Some people want it, free or, without a charge, perhaps is the best way of putting it. But there are those people who will pay. So if you're thinking of doing it, come into our Facebook group, take the advice, and listen to our podcast.
Yeah. Just kind of to close this off, Rory, I know when you set up your private practice, you set it up as a sole trader, but you also were a director in a limited company at the time. But you chose to make it a sole trader because it was something that you were doing, dare I say, part-time to supplement income. It was not your full income. You didn't want to go through the legalities of setting up a limited company, and it served you well. I know you stepped out of, I know you went to a stage where you stepped out of practice, and kind of turning that off was simple. It was pain-free. And that was what suited you, but you went into that in an informed way.